Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Tunisian lawmakers vote to ease a harsh drug law responsible for sending thousands of young first offenders to prison for smoking cannabis. Also, 2 years after Burundi's president's bid for a third term plunged the country into crisis, tensions that have forced hundreds of thousands out of the country continue to this day. And he's quite a catch, but perhaps a touch high maintenance. Sudan, the rhino, is the last of his kind in the world and has hit up online dating in Kenya in the hope of raising the millions he needs to start a family. But first, we head to Tunisia, where a harsh drug law responsible for packing out the country's prisons with first-time offenders caught smoking marijuana has been amended. Law 52 dated back to the rule of former dictator Zine El Abidine Ben Ali and imposed a mandatory minimum 1-year jail term for narcotics use, regardless of the circumstances. It meant that thousands of young Tunisians were locked up every year. Well, on Tuesday, Parliament voted to ease the terms of the legislation. Sandra Lutyens tells us more.
Today, it was true relief for many in civil society who had been fighting this law. We saw campaigners filling their Facebook accounts with words such as "finally" and "we're there" and "it's done." And for them, it's a first victory in this fight against this Law 52 because, as you said, for 25 years, it has been sending drug users to prison for this strict minimum of 1 year. So at the moment, almost 7,000 inmates, actually a third of the prison population, are behind bars because of this law. And over 25 years, some estimates say they were 120,000, and they're mostly young Tunisians, sometimes even high schoolers, and they have to go through this difficult experience of 1 year in an overloaded prison, and then when they are freed, it's very difficult for them to get back on their feet because they have a police record. Now today, a lawyer who has been campaigning against this law, he remembered that for many years, for a very long time, well, every time the idea of a reform came up, the authorities would always react in the same way, and that was any law can change, but the Law 52 still, it was that law that was amended today. And it's just a few words that have been changed, but they change a lot because the minimum sentence is now gone. It has disappeared. And from now on, judges will be able to pronounce different sentences, like suspended sentences, or even to let the defendant free to go.
Cameroon's journalist trade unions added its voice to those protesting the sentencing on Monday of reporter Ahmed Abba to 10 years in prison on terrorism charges. He worked in the country for France 24's radio station RFI and was first jailed in July 2015 for his reporting on Boko Haram extremists. He's always protested his innocence and his lawyers are appealing. Local colleagues accuse the government of trying to silence criticism and say that Abba's being scapegoated.
10 years is a very heavy sentence. But we will continue the fight as the Cameroonian Union of Journalists and demand that the authorities bring forward proofs of our colleagues' link with criminal and terrorist activities. Proofs that have never been brought forward.
Since the beginning of the case, it's always been clear that this was a witch hunt. That the government had other goals beside these accusations and were hiding behind legal procedures. Just look at the way the whole affair was conducted.
Well, Tuesday marked 2 years since Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza sparked a crisis at home by announcing his intention to run for a third term in office. His critics said the move was unconstitutional. The bid was successful but cost Burundi its stability. Earlier this evening, I spoke to Nicolas Jourmin about the progress over the last 2 years.
Well, according to the UN, these last 2 years, 500 people have been killed. According to NGOs, it's more likely to be 2,000 people. If you remember, initially, we would very often see bodies in the streets, bodies of mostly of opposition members. We're not seeing this anymore in recent months, but what NGOs are saying is that the killings are continuing, but they're just more discreet. Tensions are still there. Just a few hours ago, a grenade exploded in the district of Kamenge in the capital Bujumbura. The other main event, of course, of these last 2 years is the fact that 400,000 people have fled the country, especially to to neighbouring countries, especially to Tanzania. Recently, we were in Tanzania. We spoke to those refugees. They told us that they were mostly fleeing the Imbonerakure. That's a militia, according to the UN. It's the youth league of the ruling party. And according to the refugees, they're basically chasing away anyone who doesn't support Pierre Nkurunziza. Among the refugees we met, there were also some soldiers, and they told us that they had fled because they were targeted because they were from the Tutsi ethnic group. So the opposition saying that the general situation is catastrophic in the country, but earlier today I spoke to Willy Nyamitwe. He's the main advisor of the president, and of course he's got a very different vision. He told me, I quote, that peace, security and stability have been restored all over the country.
So you mentioned that the volume of refugees that have been caused by this crisis. Of course, when Nkurunziza, the crisis first started, there was a lot of international pressure on him about the fallout. But specifically with regard to the region, how do things stand?
As you say, there was a lot of international pressure, but not much regional pressure. And that's what Jérémy Minani, he's one of the opposition leaders in exile. I spoke to him earlier today. He told me he wants much more implication from regional leaders to force Pierre Nkurunziza to start political negotiations with the opposition. He feels that if this doesn't happen, there will have to be a UN intervention, an armed intervention. In the region, what we can say is that Tanzania is a staunch ally of Burundi, but whereas Rwanda, there are strong tensions with Rwanda. Burundi, of course, has accused Rwanda of harbouring rebel groups on its territory. It's something which UN experts have also said, but it's something which Kigali has always strongly denied.
Nicholas Chaman there speaking to me a little earlier on. Now, a Somali military court says it's executed 4 members of extremist group al-Shabab who were behind a twin attack in which 80 people were killed. They died by firing squad in Baidoa on Tuesday after having been found guilty for the bombings in the town in 2016. Well, in other news, in the Niger Delta, militant attacks on oil installations have slowed after talks with the government. But patrols say the refineries are still at risk.
Patrolling the mangroves, Nigeria's Delta Safe task force is on the hunt for illegal oil refineries. Their mission, in short, search and destroy.
To protect oil and gas infrastructure, deter and prevent militancy, sea robbery, crude oil theft, and any other forms of criminality.
The 7,000-strong force is tracking the criminals who siphon off pipeline oil to distill and resell. It's a lucrative business with devastating consequences, and not just for Nigeria's oil-dependent economy.
It has destroyed the whole environment. Commercial life in the creek might not be possible. Aquatic life is destroyed.
Militant attacks 6 months ago caused oil production to plummet, triggering the country's first recession in years. The attacks have halted following government talks, but troops on the ground say the battle against the illegal refineries continues. The task force wants to stamp them out for good.
Over time, we've been dismantling these refineries manually, and the criminals come back to resuscitate these refineries within 3 days, 1 week. So Swan Boogie crushes the materials, and it's very, very cost-effective for them to reactivate these refineries.
Oil theft in Nigeria is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's not physical theft, but endemic corruption that's at the root of the problem. The military, too, has been accused of dipping its hand into the pot of black gold.
And finally, if you're looking for love, the hottest bachelor on the block's up for grabs for the right lady. He's big-boned, but with a touch of mystery, as he leads a solitary life. Sudan is the world's last male northern white rhino and desperately needs a mate. Kenyan conservationists have put his profile up on dating app Tinder, hoping to raise the $9 million needed to send him on a date with a fertility clinic, as all efforts to go au natural have so far failed.
The only way of saving this species now is through artificial reproductive techniques. Primarily something which you will be familiar with called in vitro fertilization. This is something which is going to have to be replicated and done at scale. And then we're going to have a breeding program in Kenya to continue to build the number of northern whites so that eventually we have sufficient numbers ultimately to be able to reintroduce them back into the Gramba National Park.
I might check him out. There's something about him. That is, though, we're going to have to leave it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, and do so again. Take care.
Soon the French will elect a new head of state. Who will be the next French president? Follow the French presidential election on France 24 and France24.com.